Welcome back. Task 8 is going to talk about how students can communicate mastery of learning objectives. Problem-based learning relies on the instructor accepting multiple forms of evaluation so that students can communicate their thought processes or metacognitive growth that occurred over the course of the lesson or unit. Teachers have to be the ultimate communicators. Stop for a moment and think about the ways that you communicate in your capacity as a teacher. You most likely talk to your students, you grade their papers, you write feedback, you use body posture or stern looks to dissuade misbehavior. You call parents, many of you may have a class Facebook page, and you frequently email. This all happens on a highly regular basis for us, but when it comes to the accepted ways that students are allowed to communicate mastery of content or skill, the prevailing option is still by writing answers on a test. Now take another moment and imagine how your performance would be impacted if you were limited to a single form of communication. For those of us who have ever taught while having laryngitis or strep throat, you probably felt this frustration. By limiting our students to only written work to show us they have attained the learning goal, we are frustrating them much in the same way. As the workforce continues to globalize, the societal norms for communicating are changing. Throughout history, there have been times of only written or in-person communication. Then we added in the telephone. Next was the email, then text, and now it seems like there's a new app out every week allowing us to communicate with the world. Although most of this communication is for social purposes, the workforce has accepted these new forms as communications, and we need to allow our students to develop the communication skills to meet these changing expectations. We are talking about using social media, video conferencing, video uploads, calling, texting, emailing, and giving professional presentations. As we embrace problem-based learning for the benefits it offers of giving our students life skills, our classrooms and planning and teaching practices need to mirror the outside world. One of my favorite quotes is from Albert Einstein. "Everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid." I know we have all seen this at some point. I have had many students who could stand at my desk and teach me about the lesson they just learned. Or maybe they can explain a concept to a classmate beautifully and comprehensively, but when they hand a test in, I was lucky if they passed. Now, I know that student knew the material, or they wouldn't have been able to carry on that conversation. This is a case of a student who can clearly communicate their knowledge of a subject verbally, but if I can only judge their knowledge by their ability to write it, it appears as though their knowledge is severely lacking. This false negative has the potential to severely diminish a student's drive because to them it appears that no matter what they do, they're still going to receive a less than stellar grade. By expanding the acceptable forms of communicating mastery, we also encourage students to try multiple communication methods. From these opportunities, students can begin identifying personal strengths and planning career goals that align with their communication strengths, or make a plan for developing weaknesses that might hinder their career goals. Teachers are constantly required to reflect throughout the planning of lessons to ensure that lessons and activities and assessments align with the learning objectives. As you begin incorporating alternative forms of assessment into your lesson plans, you really have to pay attention to this detail. As fun as having your students build a model of the Alamo might be, it doesn't exactly align with ensuring your students understand the political motives behind the war or the strategic advantage the Alamo played in the victorious outcome. Yes, it is a project, but it doesn't show that students comprehend any more than what the Alamo looked like. There will be lessons that do not lend themselves to many alternative forms for assessment, and it's equally important that you recognize the inappropriate uses of these varying forms as well. You must ask yourself, is it possible for students to demonstrate and articulate mastery using alternative forms of communication? There will be times when the answer is no, but in the vast majority of problem-based learning lessons, the answer is going to be yes. The question for you is, if asked by administration or a future potential employer if you have mastered effective planning practices for problem-based learning lessons, how will you communicate that if you don't receive a final grade on a test? Some ideas for alternative forms of assessment might be to use video presentations, models, websites, discussions and projects, conversations, or reports. With proper planning, any of these forms could demonstrate mastery in a new and exciting way for students or yourself. I know I would rather have a conversation or present a lesson plan to show that I know how to plan effective problem-based lessons rather than having to sit down and take an exam. It is likely that your students feel the same. It's important to note that we aren't changing the way we assess students because they simply don't like to take tests. We aren't doing this for the entertainment factor or so our students will like our class better. We are working on implementing these alternative methods because that is how they will be assessed when they get into the workforce. They will have real performance assessments to evaluate their benefit to their employer. The number one listed skill that employers report wanting in any job candidate is the ability to communicate well. This does not just apply to written or verbal communication. They look for people who can produce clear presentations, reports, and such that they can trust to be able to communicate in any situation they encounter while employed by their company. Remember, we are revising our teaching strategies to ultimately make our students more successful upon graduation. Problem-based learning and differentiation of instruction are really hot buzzwords in professional development at the moment, but oftentimes it excludes a direct address of how those apply to assessment. But it most certainly does. As the educational community has evolved, it has become a common concept that one-size-fits-all education does not work. Students have different academic strengths and weaknesses, and when we neglect to plan for those, we risk developing certain students' knowledge and abilities much less than those that are perfectly suited for our teaching style. What is really easy for one may be excruciatingly difficult for another. I know you have experienced this with teaching content, but we really need to think of how that applies to our evaluation methods as well. Because you know your students and you're familiar with their learning styles, their communication strengths and preferences, breaking away from the restraints of written or verbal evaluation allows for a differentiated approach to reach all the way through the lesson and allow them to show and communicate mastery in a way that works best for them. Each class is made up of so many different personalities. It is one of the things that makes each class so fun, but also brings so much beauty to the world. We start to celebrate student individuality and uniqueness by incorporating those qualities into our assessment plans. We allow students to really shine and explore and develop their strengths and weaknesses. Most classes have the speaker, so let them speak. There's the artist, let them draw. The number cruncher and the analyst, let them analyze data into graphs and charts. The actor, let them give a presentation. The photographer, have them capture something. The musician and the writer, let them compose, and the builder, let them construct. When we open up different methods of accepted assessment, you allow students to take the problem-solving process all the way through to the end. They then have to plan for how they're going to show that they learn the material. And then they have to execute that plan and develop their communication skills to meet the standards you have set for them. With time and use, students come to love this type of assessment. It's so much more fun to actively demonstrate than to take a test, and it really prepares them much better for how they will use their communication skills to succeed in an authentic workplace evaluation. Be creative and think outside the box as you incorporate alternative assessments into your lesson plans. It can be so much fun to show what you've got. Happy planning.